This podcast is for thinkers and problem solvers. So I'm here with Gary, and we met on an ayahuasca ceremony in Holland, March 2020. Yeah, what drew you to that experience and taking ayahuasca?
That's a good question. I think I was 37 when I went to my first ayahuasca ceremony, and I guess of all the different things I've done, we kind of label it as self-improvement. We were talking earlier. I think the first thing I did was 31. I got hypnotherapy for smoking. I'd given up smoking. I was on 20 a day. I got really interested in the idea of hypnotherapy. Read a bit about it, did some training. I lost a load of weight, and then I started to. I've always been quite ambitious in my career. I know we'll talk about that a bit later on, but I kind of felt like I was getting to a point where it wasn't really my talent that was going to hold me back, or my intelligence. It was stress levels and how I dealt with stress and anxiety. So I started reading lots of books and doing lots of podcasts, and just randomly, I think I'd just left. I'd been in Newcastle for 10 years. I left that job. I'd moved down to the south, and I'd not been long in my job and my new life. And randomly, I'd gone out with some friends in Birmingham, and the night after, I had a bit of a hangover. I ended up missing my stop and ended up in the centre of London, which I didn't need to be. So I had to get an Uber back to where I was. And I just started talking to this random taxi driver, and he said, "Oh, have you tried ayahuasca?" And I said no, and he started talking about it, and he said, "Go and watch a Joe Rogan podcast." And I watched it, and it was, what was really interesting about it is because it's quite I guess it's a bit of an out there concept, but watching someone like Joe Rogan and like quite not mainstream, but fairly straight up people really discuss it with a lot of passion. The idea really took me quite quickly, but if I'm honest, it probably took about 4 months to actually go. It was an idea that it was still felt like a pretty brutal thing to do, and probably it's one of the biggest jumps off a cliff I think I've ever done and ever will. But so I think, but the idea over that 4 months just really formed, and then I think I probably booked it just in the new year, like in January, and then, as you say, went in March, and that's when we met. So it was after a good few years of self-improvement, but the time just felt right to do the Aya.
Nice, yeah, and wonderful place for it where we went. Really kind people. And you want to tell us a little bit about that experience you had there?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about. I've been 3 times, and I've always been to the same place. I don't really have a basis for comparison. There's quite a lot of documentaries and things on Netflix about ayahuasca, and some of it feels quite intense. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is really intense wherever you do it. It's incredibly intense, but the location where we went, and it was just from the moment you got there, it was kind of on the farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. It was just and you get there, and you meet with people, and I don't know whether we support people, hosts, whatever you want to call them, and they meet you, and there's just an immense feeling of like peace and love, and it's great. And if anything, from the weekend, you get a weekend of just sort of really chilling out and finding peace. So it's a great setting, great people, and I don't think anyone that's done ayahuasca would tell you that they weren't a bit nervous or a bit anxious. And I couldn't think of a better setting or better people to really make it feel. Don't get me wrong, I was still shitting myself. But,
Same.
I think you couldn't really ask for a better environment to go deep into yourself.
Yeah. And tell us a bit about the experience. Mine was really difficult but beautiful. But tell us a little bit about the ceremony.
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, don't get me wrong, the highlight of the weekend is, so the times I went, I did like a 3-day, there's a 3-day retreat. So you go day 1, you go there, you meet with people, you do like an intention setting as well. So you meet with like as I say, like the hosts. These are people that are, you know, they've worked with the medicine before, and they're there to really support you through the weekend. So they ask you about your intentions, and you know, most people are going there for a sort of specific reason, or you know, maybe they're dealing with some trauma, or they've got some issues, and you know, so I think they let you share those, but they're very keen to they're very keen to sort of say it's more of an intention rather than expectation. You know, I think they use that terminology quite a lot. So you set that out, and then the first time that I went, it was because it was pre the lockdown, pre-pandemic. They'd actually flown the shamans over from South America. The next two times that I've been, because of the lockdown, it was more of a spiritual session. For the first session, so after you set your intention, you then go back and you go into a yurt. It's a big tent, and you talk about your intention with the shamans, and they talk about how they're going to work with the medicine with you, to really help you realize your intention. And of course, you know, that just really kind of raises the kind of anticipation again, because you know, these people are, you know, really serious about their work, and you know, you feel like you're kind of in the presence of something pretty amazing, and that's before you've even started. And then as a group, I mean, that's the other thing I would say is, I mean, you and I mean, what, 2 years ago, you know, we've probably spoken to each other, and we've probably seen each other. This is the second time we've ever seen each other. You know? And then and like, you know, we've spoken on the phone a few times, but throughout the weekend you build this connection, and that connection really starts to build before the first night, because especially the people that have been there for the first, going there for the first time, they, you know, everyone's really, kind of going through the same together, and and then you go into to do the actual ceremony, and it lasts for about 6 hours, and everyone has a really different experience. I find mine, some people. I don't think it's reflective of personality, but some people are quite loud, and there's a lot of purging, and you know, it's a really big, dramatic experience. Whereas I've always been quite, it's been quite a sort of personal, quite calm, quite quiet experience. But internally, you know, every single time. So you know, I've been 3 times, but that means I've drunk 6 times. You know, across 2 nights each time, and every single time I've had a complete kind of shift in my perspective. So although for me it's never been, you know, you hear some of the stories about the big purging and the big, you know, the big
that
events.
Was me.
Yeah, that's I've never really had that, but equally every single time I've had this sort of huge shift and huge realization, and huge moments. So it's it is different for everyone. And I think the other thing as well is you do, although it's a very personal experience, and you do sort of almost feel quite connected to other people in the room as well. It's an energy you can't really describe.
Definitely.
But I don't know. Obviously, you know, I don't know about you, but I think throughout that weekend, you do build this incredible connection with other people, and you just have this. I think just generally, you get a real connection with sort of humanity and the human consciousness, and you just
definitely.
Although you're really working on yourself, you kind of want everyone else to do a really good job as well. So it's
special, really special.
Absolutely, and you know, everyone has a really different experience, and it's a very personal thing. You go to work on personal stuff. So
yeah, nice. Yeah, I went down the route of not through choice of a lot of sick and a lot of crying, but different to everyone, and you just, like you say, you're saying about personality, you just can't tell. Like sometimes I've seen a small lady drink 4 glasses of ayahuasca and not really go under, but then I had one on my first time, and I was out for probably 8 hours on that time, and just completely out of it.
Yeah, I think generally I'm quite a big guy, but so it usually takes me quite a lot to get under, but then I tend to go longer than most people. So you know, once the ceremony kind of stops at the end, I tend to sort of have another hour and a half, still kind of continuing my journey. So you're right, it's different for everybody, and again, I think you know, it's always what I do. Sound like a pro now, but like, you know, I always say to never be like self-conscious when you're there. You know, you're kind of just doing your own thing, and everyone's just so good, and everyone's so respectful of everyone else's journey. It's just you don't have to feel worried about how you express yourself. If it's quiet, if it's loud, if you're throwing up, if you can just, everyone just wants everyone to have a really kind of successful journey. But you're right, it is different for everyone, and people go for different reasons, and they come with different answers as well. So,
Totally.
Or they leave with different answers. It's a very personal thing.
Definitely. So tell us a bit about the reasons, or whether it's curiosity or what brought you to try it, and maybe, if you will, like some other things you experienced, or how it helped you move forward in life, or gave you what you were looking for.
Yeah, well, they have a saying that the mother ayahuasca, the plant medicine, they talk about it being like a kind of a very female energy, and that and they always say, like, mother will never give you what you want, but always give you what you need, and that was pretty much how I went there. I'd had quite a lot of but I'd always struggled with like eating and my weight and stuff like that, and I'd done a really good job in finding a good diet, looking after myself, but I just felt like something was like niggling in the background, and I just felt like I just wanted to get rid of it. Everything, like, it felt like a struggle, and I just wanted to get rid of it, and it kind of I guess for me what really came out was this and I think I've read a lot about this sort of lately, and I've made a lot more sense of it. It felt like it made sense at the time as well, though. But I think part of me was, I've always been a bit of an overthinker, and this was just it. I just kind of had this, and I don't think it was sponsored by Nike or anything like that, but I just had this kind of overwhelming thought of just do it. Just don't wait for this thing to be gone. Don't wait for you to be. Don't wait for things to fall into place. Just do it. Just get on with it. And although probably to people listening that doesn't sound like a massive realization, it probably feels like an expensive, not a lot for a lot of money, but for me that was quite a big thing. So I tended to overthink things, and at the time I really didn't realize how significant it was, but at the same time I felt this sense of freedom. And I think although every time I've been I've got I've got like kind of the answer to a question or a shift in perspective, you also get this incredible like connection with like nature and humanity and the spirituality, and actually the irony is when you start making that connection, the problem you kind of go with almost feels a bit insignificant. And so I just got this kind of overwhelming sense of stop waiting around, just go and grab stuff, and just
it's very much like an energy and a feeling, and it's hard to explain how your belief can change in one night or in a few hours.
I was never really, I wouldn't say like I've got a particular sort of religious or spiritual belief now, but I definitely, I definitely felt things and saw things that, made me believe in something that was sort of bigger than myself, and it's hard to explain, but I suppose from my point of view, it was just nice to it was almost nice to feel insignificant. It was nice to it felt like if I could feel that insignificant in the universe, then my problems felt even smaller. So I think it was the two kind of the whole just do it, just get on with it, and this sort of feeling of being connected to something sort of huge.
Perspective.
It was. It just really helped me kind of move on, and sort of afterwards, that definitely came up. I think the other thing that I massively reconciled with is the sort of the cycle of life and death as well. I think sort of deep down, I've read a lot about it. I think we're all secretly shit scared of dying, and I think that has a massive impact on on decisions we make subconsciously. And I don't know, I can't explain the thought process. It wasn't really a thought process, but I just had this massive comfort with dying. I didn't want to die, obviously. It kind of gave me more of a zest for life, but I kind of just had this, I don't know, I just had this reconciliation with, like, we're going to die and it's just part of life and it's okay. And again, I suppose that in turn logically has helped me probably just be a bit more more playful in life, and be able to get on with things. But so a lot about being a human, being part of a bigger race, being part of nature, a lot of stuff to do with death, and probably stuff that in my darker, in my quieter moments I would never have wanted to think about.
Yeah.
It's the sort of stuff you don't really like to think about.
Definitely. It's kind of like that we're avoiding it all the time, and that fear of death, and also fear of like the worst could happen. Just a lot of fear, but I kind of go through that with that session, that ceremony. You feel it all, and you feel a warmth and all these things, this interconnectiveness, and it just feels like, I mean, I'd sort of say it's a bit like everything is probably how it's supposed to be a bit, and it would be okay. It's hard to put in words though, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think every time I've been, I've almost had this like rebirth experience. It's sometimes it's been more obvious than others, but yeah, definitely this whole idea of sort of being reborn, and also this idea that the way that sort of nature develops and how evolution works and how we've developed as a world, not just a human race, is just basically by sort of dying and living all over again, and dying and rebuilt. Death is as much part of the creative process as being born. It's hard to not get deep when I talk about it. But I just think sort of some of those realizations at the time. But I think what's really weird, and we talked about it earlier, but I'd lived the majority of my life in my head, and all of a sudden I started to feel my energy become a bit more, in the kind of the heart space, and again. People that sort of practice meditation are like, well, it's not really a big deal, but for me that was a massive shift.
Same.
And you start and it's almost like you start making sense of stuff without actually having to make sense of it. So it doesn't have to go through the kind of the brain, and so totally. It's you do get a lot of stuff really came out, and I think certainly the first time you do it, the first time you're experiencing some of these kind of thought processes, is quite overwhelming.
Definitely.
If I remember with you, it was, I think there was either you or maybe one other person that had done it before. So I think, I remember you turned up late. And it was like everyone had heard about you coming. Right. It was like, he's done it before. So when you turned up, you were like this guru. Like all the newbies were kind of looking at you and just say, like, what's it like?
Yeah, well, I felt like a bit like, I've got a bit of a role to play here. Like, because it is a bit scary, and just to be a presence going, these guys that are doing it are sound, they're really kind, and it's going to be okay. Just to have a little bit of that energy, it kind of made me step up, so I wasn't thinking about myself and being scared, I think. So it helped me.
And I think the 2 times after that I've been, I've definitely felt like there's a role to play there, and you don't want to sort of start telling people what it's going to be like, because part of the fun is finding out for yourself, but at the same time, you do want it. And also I think probably the anticipation and the nervousness is part of the fun too. But I think just helping people kind of make sense of it, and just feeling okay. But I definitely remember that the first time was very different. All 3 times have been great, but the first time some of the stuff you kind of learn about things is just it's difficult to explain.
So you experienced some visions, and the time. Did you notice the time seemed to go on forever, like a repeating dream almost? Did you get many visions, or in the ceremony did you experience any of that? Some people talk to beings and stuff like that, but what was your actual experience? Just talking around it a little bit.
Yeah, there was a lot of there's a lot of visuals. I might have sort of done psychedelic stuff before, and there's I can be quite a visual person. I tend to think I've got quite a decent imagination. So a lot of it was quite visual for me, but a lot of feelings as well. You kind of relive a lot of. Even the stuff you relive, I didn't really live it visually. You sort of relive it emotionally, and I think the first couple of times I went, I cried, but the second 2 retreats, that seemed to be my purge, was just like uncontrollable sobbing, and I'm a person that doesn't cry. And now the thing is, I take my son to the cinema, and it's like literally from the first minute I'm just like bawling my eyes out. But at the time, so in the ceremonies, my purging was kind of crying. so lots of visuals, but then lots of feelings really.
Yeah.
And I didn't see, I never saw a being. I've had a lot of, the other two times that I've been, I've had some interactions with like family members and things like that, which is good. But they were kind of beings that I knew. But yeah, lots of people see, the mother and things like that. But for me, that never came up. But it's it was more, the visuals tend to be like geometric shapes, and there was a few times like the way they decorate the yurt is quite smart in that there's a few snakes kind of knocking about, and there's like I think there's like a jaguar in there and things like that.
I remember they said, I don't know if it was that one, but the shaman said, "Oh, if you see a jaguar or a snake, don't worry. That's they're the beings, they're the animals that represent ayahuasca." And I thought,
take your pick.
But
so lots of visual stuff, but then time just becomes just a real messed up concept. It's like the first, because it usually took me quite a while to get under, or get into it. Tend to go quite slowly, and then it go quite quickly, and then it goes slowly. But you tend to lose all concept of time when you're in there, which is a good thing.
Yeah. I remember it feeling like it was just like restarting all the time, and it was going on forever. But I felt like maybe that was part of it. So like you keep repeating it until you change your habit, and it's interesting what you're saying about it being like the purging might have been more emotional. That's made me think that's what my experience was like. It was quite bodily, it was quite emotional. And I think, for other people, it's more beings, more different type of spiritual. But so when you got back to your day-to-day life, how was that? What was integration like? And tell us a bit about putting into practice that energy, that just do it energy.
Yeah, well, I think it's always, I think whenever you talk about an experience after the occasion, you always kind of line it up a lot more logically. I think I just felt a lot more like connected with the world, and the just do it thing was almost a bit, at the time it was like, well, okay, yeah, fair enough, it's an easy thing to say. So it wasn't really until I started to get back into my life, and obviously those opportunities to just do it started to present themselves, and then of course I started to make decisions and started to do things and think very differently than I had done before. The first thing that obviously happened was literally, I think a week after, I think it was that I was actually working in Belgium at the time, and obviously I think I'd left the retreat, gone back to work, and then that Friday was like the last chopper out of Saigon trying to get home, because the whole world went into lockdown. So of course, straight away I'm now in a situation where, and I'd left my job for like 10 years. I've been in this job 6 months. The whole industry that I was in kind of came crashing down quite quickly. So I'm like, am I going to lose my job? And like everyone else, it was just this kind of incredible, like, what the fuck moment. And whether or not it was the universe or what, but it just felt apt that was, I'd been on my ayahuasca experience the week before, and I think the other benefit of that is a bit like everyone at the start of that lockdown in the UK. It was the weather was beautiful, no one had anything to do, and everyone was just out in nature. So I kind of had this real opportunity to kind of really strengthen that connection. And I think the first thing that happened was, after about 2 weeks, anyone that knows me, I'm like I was like the biggest meat eater ever, and my Facebook was like, my memories all full of like fillet steak and things like that. And I turned vegetarian literally just like that. I had this kind of had a vision that I was a dead fish, and
Wow.
I don't know whether I had to kind of started having this empathy for animals and whatever it was. I was like, right, I'm a vegetarian, and it was like, an old version of me would have thought of every reason not to do it, and I just did it, and I still am to this day. And it felt right, and it was like the first thing where I've gone, right, this feels right. There's loads of logical reasons not to do it, but I'm going to do it. And then I had sort of my big vision, if you like. So I'd left the old industry that I was in. I'd been there for like 10 years, and I had a bit of experience in terms of buying and selling companies, building up companies and buying them and selling them. And I'd worked with a couple of these family businesses in my old industry. I'd moved on, but I started talking to. I just had this vision that I needed to kind of merge these two companies together, and they'd be a lot stronger together. They didn't really like each other. They'd never really been in a room together. They were fierce competitors at what they did. And it was just a really ridiculous idea that would never work. But I thought, you know what, it just has to happen. And I remember speaking to both sets of shareholders from these two different businesses, and they both had the same opinion of me, which was, that's a really stupid idea. What the fuck are you talking about? And I don't know. I think it was almost like I can't even remember having the conversations, but I remember I talked very passionately about it and processed what those guys would get out of it. And within 24 hours, they'd both contacted me and said, we want to have a chat about it. And
wow.
And it was, and again, I think going through the whole thing, I think an older version of myself would have, or a younger version, a previous version of myself would have talked myself out of it, would have found a reason why it wasn't going to work. And, decided that, God, if I failed at something that, that would be the end of my life. And whereas I just had this completely different view, I was like, you know what, this is such a crazy idea. It's probably never going to work, but what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to go on a bit of a ride and have fun with it. And without going into loads of detail about it, a year later, we'd managed to bring the two businesses together. I left my job, a bit of a pay cut, and it all felt a bit far-fetched, which to be fair, it probably was. But I was like, no, I'm going to do it. So I did. I left my job, and we kind of brought the two businesses together. And the idea was that we'd bring them together, we'd build them up. After a few years, we would probably sell them for more money than what they would have got at that time. And long story short, we managed to do it in 4 months, and we sold the businesses, and the two families did really well out of it. And and I did okay out of it as well. Sort of life changing, life changing situation for me as well. So and obviously the way I tell the story, it sounds like it was quite easy, but it was just like, it was brutal. It was long days. It was lots of doubting. It was lots of like, what the fuck have I done? It was but at the same time, there was this underlying belief that even if it didn't cross the line, I was still better for it. It was that whole idea of failure in whatever form would never be a bad thing, and it kind of kept me going. And also there was this, I sort of almost became addicted to being really uncomfortable with life, and which was so unlike me. I used to live a very comfortable, very safe life, and I started to really just enjoy the fact that you could put yourself in a situation where you might fail, or it's really uncomfortable, and I just think you do get addicted to kind of growing out of that situation. But so it was it was a pretty wild 6 months. Drove myself into the ground, but it was the vision was kind of complete. And I think we pretty much, I think it was like 18 months to the day or something like that I'd been on the ayahuasca ceremony that we actually sold the business. It was, there was something in the date, but it was it linked back to that ayahuasca ceremony. It was amazing. It was a pretty cool moment.
Nice. So you sort of like everything lined up, and you were able to sort of see the opportunities and go for them, even though it took a lot of work. Because I think some people think ayahuasca will just change things just like that, but it's more about changing your way of seeing stuff, isn't it? Or opening it up. You still have to do the work.
Well, I've thought about this quite a lot, and I think when I told the story a few times, it sort of sounds a lot better when I say, I had this vision and I had this idea. But actually, when I've reflected on it, I'd had the idea for years. I'd had the ideas, when I was working in the industry previous. I think I'd even presented it once as, this is what we need to do. But and I probably had this idea. It probably wasn't odd for me to have the idea. The idea was quite logical. It was an idea that I would logically come up with. But I think what really changed is probably every single time that I'd had that idea in the past, I'd gone, "Don't be so fucking stupid," And what had really changed was this idea of, well, why not? You kind of have this different perception of the world, and it's full of possibilities, and that concept of failing is just okay. It will be okay. And Again, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but for me, it was a real shift. And yeah, so I think it's, to your point, I don't think. I think magical things do happen with ayahuasca, but I think it's more about, I just don't think it hands it to you on a plate. I think it probably gives you a slightly different way of looking at the world, and you still have to work hard, and you still have to, and that's not just work hard in terms of like doing long hours and the traditional sense. Is you have to go, you still have to do the work to push yourself into that place. I think it kind of sort of shows you the way and shows you the door, if you like, but you've got to take the tough steps and walk through it. And I think perhaps for me, and probably like a lot of other people, is that's not always a natural thing to do.
Yeah, totally. So, and then I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about your last ceremony and what's sort of been going on after the business sold, and it wasn't quite as you expected, was it? It didn't feel quite the same as you were thinking.
No, I mean, obviously, like I was, I had some arbitrary goals that I wanted to achieve, and it was like, I say they're arbitrary. I wanted to be in a certain position in my life, and all of a sudden, I'd achieved it. I'd achieved my goals that I wanted to achieve, and done them in fairly spectacular fashion, really. And you sort of watch big amount of money hit the bank and stuff like that in all those moments, and don't get me wrong, they're really nice moments, and obviously very grateful and very excited, and I was able to do some nice things, and just it was really, really good. But at the same time, I kind of had this overwhelming sense of I'm not really sure. I wouldn't say. I sort of fell into a bit of a depression. Really, it was. And what we were talking about earlier, but what was also different is loaded on top of that depression was guilt, because it's like, hang on a minute, like you've got a lot. You've got a lot here. You've been really lucky. Everything's fallen into place for you, and and you're being miserable about it, and it's just like, what the fuck? And so I just started to feel, and it took a little while to unpick it. And I think part of it was I was knackered. I think I'd literally driven myself into the ground to get to the end point, but actually I was then I'd stayed with the company that bought us. So you're now kind of working for new people and figuring that out, and they want to see returns from the business as well. So I'm like, I'm knackered, but then I've got to kind of continue on. So I think part of it, I was like, it was probably like I was physically and mentally drained. But I think secondly as well is, despite the fact that my life had clearly changed for the better, it still changed. So you still had to deal with this different scenario. Probably had to deal with the fact that I've always been quite ambitious, and I guess one of the things about ambitious people is you're always kind of running for something. Yeah, and it's almost like, well, I've got it now, and it's a bit like it's a bit like the cat that catches the mouse. It's like, well, what the fuck do I do with it now? So I kind of had I was dealing with lots of like different emotions around it, and I think maybe the biggest one was the fact that and I know that and I've only really started doing this more lately, but I've been reading a book called like The Power of Now, and it talks about this idea that we have this ongoing narrative. It'll be better when I do this. It'll be better when I do that. And it was like, actually, I've done it now. I did this thing, and all of a sudden, it's not better. Things didn't suddenly get better, and actually, what it made me realise is that perhaps maybe those things where, well, I'll deal with this issue, or I'll deal with that issue, and it was almost a case of, no, actually, I've given myself all of the reasons to think that this was all. If I achieve this will be okay. And it was almost like I've achieved it. And it's like, actually, it's not okay. So I need to go and deal with some of that shit now. So I actually saw like a coach for a little while, and she was really good. She really helped me figure out what I wanted to do. She helped me figure out. Make a decision on how I wanted to act and the things that I needed to change to make sure I was successful in this new role and this new lifestyle. But I kind of knew like I was going to go back and do do ayahuasca again. But I wanted to be in the right frame of mind, so I went again, and some really powerful stuff came out. So a lot about kind of masculinity and compassion, and I had some good good insights about my relationship with my dad, who I had a bit of sort of unfairly a bit of like resentment for, and I just had this kind of vision about how, despite the fact men can be dicks a lot of the time, and we do bad things, and actually we all kind of, most of us go to bed at night like wanting to be like decent human beings, and it's quite hard being a guy, and I just had this incredible amount of compassion for like, not only like me and my dad, but it was just everybody, and all men, and but it also put me into perspective that you could be quite compassionate and still be quite strong as well. And I think I'd always struggled with masculinity, and that I was never, although I'm quite a big guy, I've never been like never been that aggressive, or I've always been quite sort of chilled out. And and I've sort of got this sort of new concept around how you could be a bit of a, I think the way to describe it is like a kind of a peaceful warrior, if you like. So I dealt with that, and I felt like, and I remember when I was actually in the ceremony, I had this huge like release of like testosterone. So I felt like I was just walking around there like a big jungle cat or something like that. It was bizarre. So so definitely dealt with a lot of that stuff, and and it kind of, it's given me like a real different perspective, and helped me to understand like where I need to go next, and how I need to be. But it's every time I've been, I've had a completely sort of different perspective on the world.
Yeah, I've had sort of similar sort of experiences around masculinity, and kind of like carrying a lot of energy, being a man often, and not sure what to do with it, and carrying a lot of emotions that we don't know, not really taught how to deal with either. It just can be a lot sometimes.
I think rightly so. I think that being a white man is like, we've got a lot of privilege, I think, and I think most white men know that, and I think most men know that the world needs to level up a little bit, and there's work to be done to make the world a great place for every human being. But at the same time, it still doesn't make it, it doesn't mean it's not tough to be a man, and I think you're right. I think sometimes it's like, am I supposed to be sensitive? Am I supposed to be a hunter-gatherer? It's kind of figuring out the role as a male in the modern world. And I'm not, I don't think we want any sympathy. It's just the fact that it is difficult, and it's a difficult thing to figure out. And I think most men are trying to figure it out, and trying to do the right thing. And I think we forget, or sometimes feel guilty about the fact that it's hard. And we don't like to admit that we're sort of trying to figure it out. And let's be honest, we're all trying to do it, aren't we? Whether we're white men or whatever, like whether we're whatever human being we are, I think we're all trying to figure out what it's all about.
We're all on the path.
So I think it was that kind of, I had a lot of compassion for. There's a lot of men kicking around, and it's trying to find. It's quite difficult to figure out how to be, and and just having compassion for myself and compassion for everybody, really.
Nice. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. Like, thank you for sharing this with us. Really appreciate it. Really good to hear. I don't know if there's any final thoughts or any books or any resources on ayahuasca or anything that you'd want to share with anyone.
No, I think any like the Joe Rogan, if you're kind of I guess not necessarily done a lot of reading on ayahuasca, like there was a Joe Rogan podcast, obviously his YouTube stuff. I think there's a few on ayahuasca, but I think if you typed in like Joe Rogan ayahuasca, it's a very like modern manly man, isn't he? But he's he's a high performer, but he talks about the spiritual energy, and talks about plant medicine in a real kind of quite mainstream way.
Right.
So if you feel that this could be a little bit out there and a bit too spiritual for you, then that's a really good way to look at it. And then the power of now. It's quite a famous book now on spirituality, but it will kind of it's kind of knocked me on my ass a few times reading it. But great. Really good way to, especially if you're a person that is is kind of in your own head quite a lot, which is I think most people nowadays. But it just helps you have a just different perspective on the mind, and and how that works. But there's loads of books. And I think ultimately, any it was interesting that I was talking to you earlier on. I'd had a conversation with someone that had done some Tony Robbins events, and that's obviously a mile away from an ayahuasca retreat, but actually what comes up is very similar, and it's I think whatever sort of self-improvement people, I think just asking yourself those questions is however you do it, whether it's podcasts, books, hypnotherapy sessions, I think just asking the questions is just always a good place to start.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I'll put the link to the book and the Joe Rogan podcast on the show notes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, and if you found it interesting, please do share. And if you'd like to know more about my hypnotherapy, problem solving, coaching, or mindfulness teaching, please visit chris-walton.com.